This is the anthem of the Irgun that fought for independence against, they raised arms. That's how Israel became free as a nation, with the Chasdei Hashem, the miracles of God, and Jews taking up weapons. The Haganah, the Lechi, and the Irgun each had their own battle hymn. Here we go. And just to point out, it was the 1940s. They were fighting for Palestine, the entire land of Israel. West of the Jordan River, this from here, that's the Jordan River. And that's the so-called West Bank, Judea, Samaria. The east, all of what became Jordan, was torn away from the land of Israel mandate, the Palestine mandate. And they were fighting for the Palestine mandate, land of Israel. There was no, not only were there no Palestinians, originally there was no country of Jordan either. That's also fake.
היום שרה הקטנה, ניפגש בצאתי למלחמה, את המדינה לכונן, בשתי גדות הירדן גזזי צמתך, וחגרי את חגורתך, חבקיני קחי מקרא ואיתי לשורה, עלי בריקדות ניפגש עלי בריקדות, חירות נישא בדם ואש, רובה אל רובה פני יצדיע, כדור אל כדור יריע, עלי בריקדות אמסור את חיי לאומה, אל נא תבכי, כך נגזר גורלי, בכי דמעתך, לחצי המקלע אל ליבך, ובחרי לך שני מאנשי גונדתי, עלי בריקדות נתפגש, עלי בריקדות, חירות נישא בדם ואש, רובה אל רובה פני יצדיע, כדור אל כדור יריע, עלי בריקדות ניפגש.
Now we continue. So we learned in Genesis 34, Parak Lamed Daled of Breshit, the story of Shechem. We've been through it many times. We won't go back over it now. Dinah was raped, and by the son of the mayor or governor of the city, by Shechem. And you know about it. They, the brothers came up with a plan to have everybody circumcise themselves, and Shimon and Levi led the other brothers. Shimon and Levi massacred everybody in the city of Shechem on the third day after their circumcision. And Yaakov, their father, condemned them, something about what they did, that it wasn't necessary. Yaakov said to them, "You've brought trouble on me, making me odious among the inhabitants of the land. The Kenites, the Perizzim, my fighters, are few in number, so that if they unite against me and attack me, I and my house will be destroyed." And the last word in the Torah was given to Shimon and Levi: should our sister be treated like a whore? And the question became, and has been, and the commentators discuss, was it permitted? No one questions that it was permitted to kill Shechem, who raped Dinah and who took her hostage, and his father. They were accessories. No one questions that under Jewish law, it was permitted to kill them in battle. No trial, no witnesses, They knew it happened. How did they know? Shechem came into their home and said, I'd like to have your daughter. May I marry her? And the father came also. My son would like to do. That's it. None of this. No need to say, well, we're going to have. How do you plead? Guilty or not guilty? Well, my lawyer says I plead not guilty. Okay, trial set for 7 months from now. And then there's witnesses, and then you start picking a jury, and then you start with all kinds of trying to disqualify this one and that one, and motions, and it's 7 years later, and you finally get a judgment, and then the guy's sentenced to death, and 35 years later, you wait for some president to get elected, and turns to the guy who was sentenced on death row 35 years ago and pardons him or commutes his sentence. This is not how it's done in Jewish law. Permitted no question at all to execute both Hamor and Shechem, killed him. Question is, what about the rest of the people? So we learned again, as I said, I'm reviewing from last time, but doing much more quickly. We learned from Rambam, and as we went over the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach, the 7 Noahide laws that God commanded to all people in the world, Jewish and non-Jewish. Non-Jews are not required to observe the 613 laws of Judaism, but are required to observe 7 natural laws that should be obvious and self-evident to anyone with ethics and morals, regardless of religion, not to kill, not to steal. I don't want to go into all of them and all the thinking behind them, but those laws, there are actually 6 of them, and the 7th is the society must create courts that enforce the 6 laws. That's Rambam. And Rambam says, for example, since the city of Shechem did not have courts to enforce the 6 laws, therefore the people of Shechem who tolerated that all were liable for death. Under Jewish law, if a city does not have law, or a town or a village does not have courts to enforce the 6 laws of Noach, and if the people accept that, then they all are liable for death. Now, you don't go around from town to town killing people. But once they put the issue on the table by actually raping a lady in Israel, a Jewish woman, it's on the table. You leave them alone until they strike first. Like Rambo said, first blood. Once they draw first blood, the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach come in. For that, all of the people of Shechem deserve to be killed. Because Shechem, the son of the governor-mayor, stole a person, and they all saw, and they didn't do a thing about it. No one objected. And if you see a parallel to Gaza, you're right. There is no one in all of Gaza who has publicly objected. Now, you'll say, well, it's dangerous. They elected Hamas. And every time Hamas went to war and succeeded in killing Jews, they did not protest. There's been no protest movement against it. There's been no Nobel Prize winner, no peace movement that's ever come out in Hamas Gaza. And if you'll say, well, it's too scary, there are places like Myanmar and places Russia, Alexei Sakharov, Anatoly Sharansky, even China, that guy who stood in front of the Chinese tanks. Virtually every society, there is someone, some hero who stands up. You name it. There are people tragically, very tragically, places like Iran, there's the individual here and there who speaks out, who goes online under an assumed name and tries to avoid being caught, but is a voice out of Iran opposing the regime. Our Sunday class a few weeks ago, I showed you an Iranian woman who publicly sang, dressed like in Western clothing. People, every country practically, there's somebody that risks their lives. They just arrested the guy in Venezuela who ran against Maduro. And that's very courageous. There's that guy in Putin's Russia who opposed him. And, he ended up dying. They tried to kill him one way, and then he got out and he came back, and they told him, don't go, he'll kill you. But he said, I'm coming, and then they put him into prison, and they killed him in prison. So I don't recommend it. What can I say? But every society, before someone says, well, Rabbi, Gaza, it's very dangerous to fight against Hamas. Every society like those I've mentioned, not even one person out of Gaza, not even one person. And not only that, again, Hamas did not take power as, let's say, so many of these dictators do. They ran in an election. And Jimmy Carter, you've heard of him, Saint Jimmy, the way they're writing him up this past week, was a vicious anti-Semite. A vicious anti-Semite. I have an article coming out tomorrow, I believe, in the American Spectator about him. The real story on Jimmy Carter. He was a vicious anti-Semite, and he went to Gaza for the purpose of supporting Hamas. He had a record of embracing Hamas all over the Middle East. It's in my article tomorrow. And Arafat. And he went to Gaza with a team of people to oversee the election so as to report that it was a fair and free election. Now, his purpose was to hurt Israel and to promote Hamas by telling the world that they got elected freely and democratically. That was his purpose. But 30 years later, if you think about it, it backfired, because it is on record that even Jimmy Carter, St. Jimmy, testified that it was a free and fair election. His point was Hamas got in fair and square. He didn't mean for it to be interpreted as I interpret it and so many others among us. It shows that the people chose him, that it wasn't under Hamas, that the people chose Hamas. They were the people's choice. So there were no innocent civilians in Gaza. They chose. They didn't have a Democrat. They didn't have Mensheviks. When the Tsar of Russia was overthrown, it wasn't as though Lenin took over right away. There was a battle between the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks. And the Mensheviks actually initially took over, but they couldn't hold it. And the Bolsheviks took over. You know the rest of the history. But there were two voices, not in Gaza. So on the subject of innocent civilians, what we would say in secular law is the burden of proof by now falls on the civilians to prove they're innocent. Okay, Rambam says they saw in Shechem and they didn't put him on judge. They didn't judge. So we went to the Gemara and we saw the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Nun Vav Amud Bet, folio 56b, sort of saying the same thing Rambam says. And actually Rambam is after the Gemara. I learned Rambam first for you because he's easier to understand. He's in Hebrew, simple Hebrew, and Gemara is in Aramaic. But Rav Acha Bar Yaakov said, bottom line, that under the laws of Noah, it is imperative, obligatory in every society, to set up courts of justice, to enforce every single place, to enforce those laws. But they didn't, just as Jews, Yisrael, must set up courts of law to enforce and apply the 613 laws of Judaism, in every town, in every village, in every city. Likewise, non-Jewish societies must set up courts of enforcement of those laws. It is very arguable, not going to get into that part of today's politics, but the reason I discuss this and I get into the politics, I try not to turn it into 30, 40 minutes of politics. But these laws, some people study these laws like, oh, that's interesting. Like in some yeshivas, I've attended yeshivas, some of the Rebbis, you learn it. No application, just abstract. What does the rabbi say? How does the Gemara answer? What do we hold? No, but what's the abstract application today? The abstract application, I got to tell you, there's a very serious question. Not that anybody is allowed to go around killing people, But I would argue there's a very strong application halachically. Again, we're not allowed to follow halakha when it comes to life and death. We have to follow the laws of the land. Dinah de malchuta Dinah. You have to follow the laws of the land. You can't say the Talmud allows me to kill somebody, so that's my defense. That's no defense. You can't do that. But since we're learning the law to understand what it means, at least in morally, and to understand how to react when something happens, arguably, halachically, though not legally under civil law, what Daniel Penny did when he killed that guy in the subway, perfectly halachically okay. Same with Bernard Goetz years ago. How could I say that? Because Los Angeles does not, we'll see what the new DA does. But without getting into a long 45 minutes of politics, I don't want to do that. I really don't. But I want to apply the Gemara. I want to apply the Rambam. Los Angeles does not apply until under the last several years under Gascon or Gascon. Los Angeles did not enforce the law. They didn't enforce the law. People would steal. That's Geneva. It's one of the 7 mitzvahs b'nai Noach. It's literally one of the 7, and they didn't enforce it. If you stole, I'm not making it up, and I'm not going to get into a long 45 minutes on Gascon. Well, I don't know how he pronounces it. He did not, under a certain amount, they did not put people in jail or arrest them. If it was less than that, they gave him a citation. There's absolutely no enforcement. Again, no politics here. There's no enforcement. That was Prop 36. All we're asking for, the voters said, is we want enforcement. I live in Orange County with Denise. That's one county that's adjacent. That's the next county over. When you come into Orange County, there's a big billboard. It's a big billboard. Notice to crooks. You are now entering Orange County. We enforce the law. We put you in jail. Unbelievable. Unbelievable to see such a board. There's a few of them signed by the DA that his name gets to be on the board, so he can run for another office and everybody knows his name. You are entering Orange County. We enforce the law. In Los Angeles, if you steal, it's changing now, under $950, I believe, or $875, it's a citation. I believe Prop 36 changed it. There's a great YouTube. Go look it up. The great YouTube of these 2 women who were in a in like a Walgreens or a CVS pharmacy in North Orange County, just on the other side of the LA border. And you actually see them, the closed circuit cameras in the pharmacy, you see them stuffing their pockets in their bag with deodorants and perfumes and the little stuff. And as they're walking out, all of a sudden the sirens and the cops they get them and they handcuff them, and the cops with their body cams, you can hear them, you see the video, you hear them, and the cop says, "You're arrested, we're handcuffing you, no citation." And one of them says, "What do you mean no citation? It was less than $875. Like they actually, you would think it's a comedy show. They actually tally how much they're stealing to be sure it's less than it. He said, "You're in Orange County, ma'am. You go to jail." And then they start cursing each other. And like one yells at the other, "You didn't tell me this is Orange County." Rambam says, and the Gemara says, you have to follow the law. You have to enforce it. No ands, ifs, or buts. And therefore, Shechem, they didn't have the courts. Continue. So it brings us to the Ramban and the Gur Aryeh that we learned last time. Let's do the quick versions again. Correct Ramban talking about the massacre of all the people of Shechem. Ramban, Nachmanides, one of the most primary commentators on the Torah. And he is not so happy about the mass murder. The correct interpretation appears to me to be that Yaakov is saying that Shimon and Levi are brothers. And because of that, I've explained, Yaakov was angry with Shimon and Levi for having committed violence when they killed the people of the city Shechem. For the people of the city had not sinned against them at all. They even had made a covenant with them They signed a deal. They swore. They didn't sign, but the city made a deal. We'll all circumcise and you become part of our people, and we get to marry your girls and you marry our girls, and we get your property. And they were circumcised, thus being enabled to return to God and become included within the people of the household of Avraham. Part of the souls they'd gotten in Haran. The idea is that the people of Shechem, who were Kenites, were having circumcised, may have thus become eligible to become Jews. It's a question. They did not do it l'shem giur. They didn't do it for the purpose of accepting the one God. But then again, the Torah had not yet been given at Mount Sinai. And Avraham was uniquely observing the laws of the Torah pre-Sinai, but it is not clear how much the Shechemites would have had to and what they were taking on. And they did say we're circumcising to be part of the Jewish people. And is there a difference between circumcising to join the ethnic group or circumcised to join the theological group? Jacob was additionally angry with them, lest people say the matter was done at his suggestion. So he didn't want people thinking that he was a defrauder. So it's complicated for Ramban, and he says, therefore, it's problematic. And the only thing Ramban adds is that he states in their defense that Yaakov also was staying in defense of Shimon and Levi, that they are brethren. This is on his deathbed. This is not chapter 34 to 49. When Yaakov was dying, he issued his final tzav, his final, let's say, his last will and testament orally to all of his sons and to Shimon and Levi. He said they're brothers. Achim. He didn't say a pair. They didn't say it to umim. They're brothers, but they're violent. Their weapons are tools of lawlessness. So why did he say they're brothers? Why didn't he just come straight out and say they're violent? He was stating in their defense that they acted as they did out of their brotherly zeal, not only achim to each other, but achim to Dinah. Remember, they had all the 12 tribe brothers were born to Yaakov, but many had different mothers. There was Leah and Rachel and Zilpah and Bilhah. Shimon and Levi were born to Bilhah, to Leah, as was Dinah. So they were truly acting out of brotherly zeal for their sister, their complete, thus suggesting they were not for this not for the extenuating circumstances. They would have been deserving of great punishment, and the sin would have been unforgivable. But under Ramban, maybe they did not deserve great punishment, and maybe their sin was forgivable. So Ramban is equivocal. And on the other hand, Gur Aryeh, when we talk about Gur Aryeh is also known as the Maharal of Prague. Yehuda Lo, or Yehuda Lev ben Betzalo, the very, very famous Maharal. Maharal of Prague, some of you have heard. On top of everything else, his Gur Aryeh is an incredibly major commentary on the Torah, but he's probably most famous in, let's see if they put it here in Wikipedia, in the legend of the Golem. He's most famous in common, non-learned Judaic lore, L-O-R-E, as being the rabbi who supposedly created the Golem and controlled the Golem. It's another story, but we're not going into that. But the Maharal of Prague is major Rav, major posek, major decisor. And he talks about the same story about what they did. And he says, if only Shechem sinned, if only the son of the governor and mayor sinned, what was the sin of the rest of the city for which they all deserved to be killed? Now, Rambam, that's not Ramban, that's Rambam of the Code, the Mishneh Torah, whom we learned a few minutes ago before the Ramban, answered that they're commanded to set up courts, etc., etc. For any sin they violate, they're killed. And so here they witnessed the evil act of Shechem. Kidnapping Dinah did not judge them. And for this they deserve to die, for they failed to judge him. But truthfully, these words are surprising, for how could they have judged the son of their prince, right? I alluded to that a bit when I talked about could the people of of Gaza really just come right out openly and start like doing like Liz Cheney attacking Trump, which is not like putting her life on the line, just speaking her conscience, her truth. Uh, could they just go out and just publicly start attacking the prince? He's the number two. He's the son of the king, of the governor, since they feared him. Even though they're commanded to judge, that is when they can judge. But God exempts one who is under duress. If there's a situation you just can't do it, you can't do it. If you're sitting in, God forbid, in Auschwitz, and you can't access, let's say, kosher food, or if you're drafted by the Tsar to fight in his army, and all you could eat is pork and other mitzvahs you cannot do in Auschwitz. If you can't do the mitzvah, even things a lot less coercive. If you can't do it, you can't do it. So how could they have been judged like that? It appears, says the Gerardi, that there is no difficulty explaining why all the males in Shechem deserve to die, because it was war. And in Judaism, a war, ethics and values of Jews during war, a war between two nations is different. The Jewish people and the Kenites are considered two different nations, not one nation. As it is written, the whole idea of the covenant that they got into was, we will give your daughters to you and take your daughters to us, and we will dwell among you and become one nation. If you go along with all this, we'll become one nation. In other words, so far we're not. Two different nations, Jewish people and Canaanites, two different nations, implying that initially they were not considered one nation. Therefore, the Jews were permitted to fight them like any nation who fights another nation, which the Torah permits. Israel is allowed to fight Gaza, Hamas, non-Hamas, if they shoot rockets, Hezbollah, Lebanon, Syria under Assad, Syria under the next ISIS, anybody that attacks Israel, any nation. Even though the Torah says when you draw near to a city to fight it, you shall offer peace. That applies when they've done nothing to Israel. That's when Israel is trying, for example, endeavoring to expand the natural borders of Eretz Israel, like at the time of Joshua when they came in. So the Jews came in from the desert to take possession of God's legacy to the Jewish people, the land of Israel. So when you come to each city, you have to give them an opportunity to make peace. And we've learned that, and we're not going to go into that, but we've learned that as foundational to this. When they've acted against Israel, as they did here when they breached them to commit an evil act, okay, all bets are off. Then even though only one of them sinned, since he's a part of the nation and since they instigated, it's permitted to avenge this from all of them. They drew first blood. And that's it. All of these Western rules, now again, I have to emphasize that there are just certain limits on what you can do that violates the law of the land. Let's be very clear. You cannot just go around saying, well, that's your defense in court. Well, the law of the city, of the country, of the nations is X, but I followed Torah law. That doesn't work. Dinah d'malchuta Dinah. You have to follow the law of the land. But it is terribly, terribly important to know what Jewish law is for many reasons. First of all, when the law of the land is not clear, is open itself to debate, it's important to understand. Secondly, it is important to know, are you on God's side or are you not? A lot of people go to war saying God's on our side. That's a big thing. Every country goes to a God's on our side. That is not the way to speak and ask. The question is not, is God on your side? The question is, are you on God's side? That carries great weight for the soldiers fighting, for their morale and their encouragement and sense of security as they attack. When Jewish boys are fighting for Israel in Gaza against Hezbollah, etc., and they're given orders, shoot into this building because there are Hamas in this building, and they're shooting and it's a hospital, or bomb this structure because there's a Hamas command tunnel underneath it, and they know there are people in that building. It is extraordinarily important to know, beyond what international law says, and that's the job of the generals and the attorneys in the JAG, the JAG of Israel, to interpret the law, what they're allowed to do. It is terribly important emotionally and psychologically to know that what you are doing is right in the eyes of God. And while there may be a debate to be held in the International Court of Justice or International Criminal Court, and they will have to be dealt with, and that is something that is going to be the bottom line arbiter, it is critical to go to sleep at night. When you go to sleep at night after attacking that hospital, and tomorrow you're told to attack another hospital or a school, it is important to know, are you doing truly the right thing? Or are you being ordered to commit war crimes? And it is central to that to know that according to Torah, you're doing the right thing. Now, again, you still have to understand you'll be judged by secular law. I've said many times in these classes that the secular law is so unjust in so many ways, and we all know it. You're not supposed to say it, but we all know it. We all know so much law. We all know it's unfair. We all know innocent people who, just to put Daniel Penny on trial or Bernard Goetz on trial, it's unfair. And he could have been found guilty because Alvin Bragg does not prosecute people who steal $875, but he prosecutes Daniel Penny. There's so much unfairness. People who get shot in self-defense, and then they're the ones who get sued and have to pay. It is very important to know the halakha allows the killing of civilians in a country that shoots first at Israel, at us. It's permitted, not if you're just looking to kill people to kill people. If your personal goal is to kill people, that's forbidden under Jewish law. We'll read it, and I'll remind you. But if your purpose is to defend Israel and fight back, then you cannot be deterred, because otherwise you can be darn sure that of the 875 Jewish boys and Druze and some Arabs who have died fighting for Israel in the last year, there are some who died because they were a little hesitant on the trigger, afraid that maybe they'll accidentally kill someone innocent in the background of their Hamas target. And so they hesitated and they got shot first. And it's happened too many times over the years. Continuing. So this is so with all wars which they encounter, like the attack of the Midianites, not only Amalekites, which is a unique baby, but attacking the Midianites. When the Torah says, Nikom, Nikmat, and Minyan, even though there were many who had done nothing among Midian, okay, nothing, and I will take questions at the end as always. This was not a valid distinction. Since they were members of the nation who acted wickedly against the Jewish people, it was permitted to engage all the Midianites in war. And such is the case with all wars. All wars. Now, we're reminded, and this also from last time, and I told you we would be doing a bunch of review to get back in the swing of things here, stream of things. And so we said also in 1 Samuel chapter 15, when God commanded Shaul, King Saul, by the mouth and word of prophecy of Samuel the prophet, Shmuel Navi, where Samuel instructed Saul to attack and destroy, obliterate Amalek. Saul got to work, organized the army, got everybody together, Saul mustered the troops and rolled them at Telaim, 200,000 men on foot, 10,000 men of Yehudah. And they advanced to the city of Amalek, the border of Amalek, and they lay in wait in the wadi. A wadi is a valley. By Avosha, they still today in Israel, when the Arabs call valleys wadis, or in Hebrew vadi. By Avo Shaul Adir Amalek, Saul came to the brink of the city of Amalek, and they waited at the river or at the valley. And Saul said to the Kenites, not Canaanites, not Canaani, but Kenites. Some countries have similar names, Niger and Nigeria, so that, have different names, but similar. Come, withdraw at once from among the Amalekites. You're living in their midst, get out. We're giving you a little time to get out, that I will not destroy you along with them. Giving you a break because you showed kindness to the Israelites when they left Egypt. In many aspects of that, Jethro, the father-in-law of Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher, father of Tzipporah, was a Kenite. And the Kenites were kind to the Jews. So we owe you one. So the Kenites withdrew. Again, Suru, turn away. Redu mitoch Amalek, get away from the Amalekites. Penosif chaimo, lest I include you, take you down, imo with him. V'ata, and you, asita chesed, you did kindness, him with, call all b'nei, sons of Yisrael. You did kindness with all the sons of Israel, the Jewish people, Balatam Mitzrayim, when we got out of Egypt. And as a result, Vayasar Keni mitoch Amalek. So they got up. So what is the implication? The implication is clear. The implication is, no, it doesn't even warrant commentary. That had the Kenites not removed themselves, they would have been massacred along with Amalek. And there was no question. Not by accident, it was premature. Amalek, Saul, had a clear battle plan. We're killing everybody. And we're not going to stop and start checking who's Amalek and who's Keni. We'll let them out, get out. Israel went beyond what she had to do because the Arabs in southern Gaza are the same exact Arabs in Gaza as the Arabs in northern Gaza, western Gaza, eastern Gaza. But before Israel went into Rafiach, they actually let them evacuate. And they created a whole system of avenues for them to get out. And Israel's been doing that throughout. And it's been a game of whack-a-mole because it was so predictable. What are you going to do? Hamas hides among the civilian population, tunnels underneath hospitals and mosques and schools. They hide in the tunnels and in the hospitals and mosques and schools. They set up their launchers on the rooftops of residential buildings. They hide behind ladies. They dress up as women. And so if Israel declares a safe zone so that people can evacuate, a lot of Hamas who are about to be slaughtered hide among the others and go out with the safe zone. So by the time you've cleared out all the innocent civilians of Rafiach, a whole bunch of the Hamas people got out also. But Israel killed their plenty, a whole bunch, 2 battalions of Hamas in Rafiach. They eventually got Yahya Sinwar. You'll remember that Kamala Harris said, don't go in, you'll massacre all the people. We've looked at the maps. There's no way to get them out. And Biden embargoed weapons if you go in. Remember all of that. You'll never be able to do it. You won't find anything there. They only found Yahya Sinwar there. And then what ends up happening is Israel had already wiped out Hamas in northern Gaza and central Gaza, Khan Yunis. And now they're finding that the Hamas who got out of Rafiach worked their way back up, and the party's beginning all over again like a merry-go-round. Israel now is at war in northern Gaza. going after all the Gaza guys who came from other Hamas from elsewhere and have now gone back to northern Gaza because Israel declared it was going to attack everywhere but northern Gaza. Northern Gaza is safe. So Hamas went to northern Gaza. So now Israel's got to go back to war in northern Gaza and has announced that northern Gaza no longer is a safe zone, and you better get out of northern Gaza and go to some other Gaza. And they've made a decision this time. They're not literally going to flatten the region, but this time, two factors. Number one, we're sick and tired of this. And number two, what is today? 9th. 11 more days. Help is 11 days away. And so they're going to go. And all hell will break loose, as the expression goes. But that's what's going on. So we see halakha in Navi, not commentary, but in Navi, King Saul, the first king of Israel, prepared to kill everyone in his sight who, whether Amalekite, non-Amalekite, innocent civilian, non-innocent, in order to fulfill God's command. We'll do a little bit more, though we hadn't quite gotten to yet. And then, of course, we'll take it up more next week and answer questions. Let's just go a little bit more here. So this is King David. Okay, I want to get this in. This is very important. It's brand new. We didn't do it, and I'd really love to get this in. So it might just a little bit old. Okay. We've learned about King David so much on a Tuesday night class, and we've learned that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God Almighty, told him nevertheless that it would not be he, but his son Shlomo, Solomon, who would build the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple. And we even learned in Tuesday night class, maybe also Thursday, the various reasons discussed and suggested in the Gemara and by other rabbinic commentators as to why it was that God did not authorize David to build a temple, but instead delayed it until his son Solomon would be born. Shlomo had not yet been born, and then would grow up, etc. Why was David denied that right? He was the obvious tzaddik to build it, despite the David bat Sheva matter that we're in the middle of learning. He's the precursor of Mashiach, Messiah. He's the holiest of holies, to use the term that Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach Zichrono Livracha would say. So why did God not let David build the Beit HaMikdash? And there are opinions. I taught you them just to refresh you so quickly without looking at the text. One opinion is he was so righteous that if he had built a temple, God would have felt that he, God Almighty, could not ever destroy it because it was built by David. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew that in the future the Jews would sin and a punishment would befall them that they would have to have their temple destroyed. And it would happen a second time under Rome. So in order to have that possibility, one opinion is that God did not want David to be the one to build the temple. To destroy the temple built by Shlomo, God could do, he felt. And that's one of the reasons. There are other reasons. But a famous one is that David spilled blood. He had killed Goliath, albeit that was very righteous blood. There was no choice. Someone had to defeat Goliath. We learned this in Tuesday night class, the war between Israel and Kenites, Philistines, in which Goliath was the head of the Philistine military, and it was life or death for the nation. We would have otherwise been enslaved by the Philistines. It was great. It was beyond the mitzvah. It was a matter of historic proportion that David killed Goliath. There's nothing wrong with spilling his blood. And there was nothing wrong with spilling the blood of all the Philistines and all the battles that David had to fight, and the Moabites and the Edomites that we've been learning about Tuesday nights because of the wars that they started. So why is it that David would have been punished, according to that rabbinic opinion, not to be allowed to build a Beit HaMikdash for having spilled blood? It's not, no one's saying that he spilled innocent blood. It's just that he spilled a lot of guilty blood, but too much. Let's take a look at the discussion, 1 Chronicles, Divrei Hayamim, Aleph, Parak Chavdat, Pasuk Chet, chapter 22, verse 8. Vahi alai dvar Shem limor, dam larov shafachta u'mochamot gedolot asita. David says, the word of God came to me. You spilled too much blood. Larov, not dam shafachta, not that you spilled blood. You spilled larov, like harbe, too much blood. U'milchamot gedolot asita, and you made many great wars. Immediately in that same sentence, immediately thereafter, lo tivna bayit lishmi. Therefore you will not build a house to my name. Ki damim rabim, because too much blood, tons of blood, liters of blood, shafachta artza lefanai, you spilled before me. And that's, well, what's that all about? Radak, and here's where I'm planning to close for tonight. Radak says on those words, let's make sure I've got the right one here. Okay. Radak says, so on the one hand, David was responsible for killing of all kinds. On the one hand, says that the text says you shed too much blood before me. Seems to me that the blood that David shed was the blood of innocent people. And we can think of two. Uriah, you know Uriah from our Tuesday night class. He's the one who's the husband of Bathsheba and then divorced. You know the story. And he was also the cause, David felt he was the cause of the deaths of those priests of Nov. We learned about during the time of King Saul, when Saul executed the 51 Kohanim in the city of Nov, looking for David, and they had given him sanctuary. David said, I'm the cause of the deaths in your father's house. So Radak says it's also possible that among the Gentiles he killed, who were not engaging him in battle, there were good and righteous people. So maybe he was not allowed to build a temple because he killed Uriah and was responsible for the killing of the Kohanim, and maybe killed innocent people during battle. No, Radak says. Although he was not punished for this. He was not punished for this, for killing good and righteous people in battle, innocent civilians, because his intent was to wipe out the wicked ones. If he had been deliberately aiming at genocide and trying to kill innocent Philistines because he was sick and tired of them, that would have been a grave sin. But his target was to wipe out the bad ones, and the other ones were in the way. For this, because his intent was to wipe out the wicked ones so that they not infiltrate Israel. Similarly, when he was in the land of the Philistines, was to save himself, that he would leave no man or woman alive. It was him, it was he, or they. Nevertheless, Radak says, because he ended up shedding a great deal of blood, it's just like a lifetime of killing, albeit legitimate, justifiable. God just felt it unseemly that David be the one to build a Beit HaMikdash. David was not punished for it. He just was not given this extra medal, this extra notch on his belt. God prevented him from building the Holy Temple, which is for peace, atonement for sins, and intense prayer. That's why, just as God prohibited wielding an iron tool over the altar and the Holy Temple, because iron is used in making weapons. Weapons for killing are made of iron. One should not generally make from it objects designated for peaceful purposes. And therefore, the Beis HaMikdash was not supposed to be, no iron was supposed to be used in building the Beit HaMikdash. And that's why I taught you a long time ago on the question of, and by the way, we're done with text for the night, and I'll take question in a moment. And that's why, as I taught you in the past, when they had to carve and build the blocks for the building of the walls of the Beit HaMikdash. You've been at the Western Wall, which is later on, that was Herod, much, much later on, the second generation Beit HaMikdash. But when they had to carve and had to make it nice and make the pieces fit well beautifully, and they weren't allowed to use metal objects. I taught you about the shamir, that miraculously, in Talmudic times, there was a worm, W-O-R-M-I, that's it, a worm, the shamir, that had teeth, so to speak, sharper than diamond and coal and a steak knife. And Shlomo HaMelech used the shamir in order to carve smooth stones, because they were not allowed to use metal. And because they were not allowed to use metal, God helped them out by making this miraculous animal creature, the shamir, to do it. And I told you when I taught you that Yitzchak Chernovitz or Chernowski or something like that of Poland, when he made Aliyah and became the leader of the Lechi, the Lochmei Cherut Yisrael, the freedom fighters for Israel, founded by Avram Stern, changed his name. He's a short guy, and he changed his name from Yitzchak Chernovsky or whatever to Yitzchak Shamir, as if everybody in those days knew stuff. Even the non-religious who never studied Torah, if you grew up in a community, you knew stuff. And so called himself Yitzchak Shamir. I may be small, like a little worm, but let the British start up with me. And after the Lechi assassinated Lord Moyne and assassinated Count Folke Bernadotte, they saw this guy is not to be trifled with. And so he eventually became Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzchak Shamir. That's the class for tonight.